1. I was 18 at the time. One evening, me and my two friends, Mike and Paul, decided to go camping. Well, camping maybe isn't the right word since we didn't intend to spend the night, only to chill and have some fun around the campfire for a while. The plan was simple. Head out, build a campfire, drink a few bottles of wine, eat something, and head back home for a good night's sleep. We met at my house. When it was still sunny outside, we got ready, and we headed out. Our destination was an old abandoned quarry in the middle of the woods, which was maybe 40 minutes from my house. Even though the quarry had a tragic and frankly creepy history, it's a popular place for such occasions. When we got there, the sky was already colored red as the sun slowly sank behind the hills. We quickly gathered all the firewood that we could, so we wouldn't have to look for it later. As the darkness fell and absorbed all of our surroundings into impenetrable blackness, we already managed to get the fire going. We were in a great mood, and we were getting ready for our first toast. That's when we realized that we made a horrible mistake. We forgot the corkscrew. We were trying to open the wine without it, but we quickly gave up, because the bottles were quite expensive and we didn't want to damage them. At this point, it was clear that one of us would have to sacrifice himself and jog back to retrieve the corkscrew. After a bit of haggling, I volunteered. However, I had two conditions. Firstly, they would give me a hatchet in case something went wrong along the way. Secondly, no pranks when I got back. Mike and Paul agreed without hesitation. They shoved the hatchet into my one hand and a flashlight into the other, and sent me on my way. As I was jogging through the forest, I heard a noise resembling a wild boar. Suddenly, I remembered a warning I received from an older hunter a few days ago. He said that this time of year, boars were getting dangerous, especially at night. I was a bit nervous, but luckily I managed to survive with no harm. I arrived safely to my house, much to the surprise of my mum, who didn't expect me so early. I explained the whole deal. She just laughed. I grabbed the corkscrew and was back on my way. Not wanting to experience an unpleasant boar encounter, I chose another, slightly longer path, this time through an open field. After a while, I got to our spot. It was a small clearing surrounded on one side by massive rocks, maybe 70 meters tall, and on the other side by thick forest. Somewhere in the middle of the clearing was our campfire. When I approached it, I realized there wasn't anybody, although our backpacks were still on the ground and the fire was burning bright. Great, we specifically agreed that there would be no pranks when I got back. Those dicks think that they're funny, I thought to myself. I resignedly sat down near the fire while facing the woods. There's only one place those two assholes could have hidden, I thought. I was really tired, and all I could think about was the taste of the exquisite Pinot Noir we brought with us. I really wasn't in the mood for their games, and I was getting quite mad. That's when I heard a snapping of twigs and a rustling of leaves from the edge of the forest, maybe 30 meters from where I was sitting. The sound was rhythmical, and it was undoubtedly the sound of somebody walking. I aimed my flashlight to the spot where sounds were coming from. Between the trees, I spotted a tall person wearing a dark hoodie. As I shined my flashlight on him, he stopped walking, turned to me, and just kept staring motionlessly. Even though he was directly facing me, I couldn't really see his face. I shouted, "Paul, you fat bitch! I know you're trying to scare me. We agreed on something, so stop messing around and come out." As I finished, the hooded figure just turned around and walked deeper into the woods. Exactly at that time, my phone started ringing. Hastily, I took it out of my pocket. It was Mike. I took the call and started barking at him. "Really funny, you assholes. I thought we agreed on something." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you trying to mess with me. I clearly saw you. You can come out now." Mike froze for a minute. For what seemed like an eternity, all I could hear was his heavy breathing and Paul mumbling in the background. When he finally stepped back to reality, he said, "Dude, we're at your house. We heard some footsteps. At first we thought you were trying to fuck with us. Then we got scared and decided to look after you. I forgot the phone at your house, so we couldn't even call you. Just get the hell out of there and we'll come back for our stuff together." "Bull, that's just another of your funny pranks. I'm not buying it." "Hold on a second." For a while, all I could hear was some incoherent mumbling. "Hey, what's going on?" asked the voice of my mum coming from the phone. My head suddenly spun and my heart skipped a beat as I realized that they weren't kidding. Suddenly, a freezing wave of fear ran through my body. However, I managed to convince my mum that everything was fine, that she doesn't need to worry. She gave the phone back to Mike. "Just leave everything and come back. We're heading out now. We'll meet you halfway there." "I'm not going anywhere alone again. You better get your asses back here and do it quick. I'm waiting for you." "But—" I hung up. I didn't wish to make any more noise than I already did. I quickly turned off my flashlight and started to back off from the light of the fire. I moved all the way to the huge wall of rocks. I figured that if I had my back covered by the rocks, I would eliminate one of the possible ways the unwanted visitor could approach me. I was standing there in complete darkness, trying not to make a sound while tightly clutching my hatchet, which would be for the next half an hour my best friend. I had to constantly convince myself not to curl into a ball in fear. Even my own body started to betray me, as my hearing got worse due to my savagely beating heart. I was trying to calm myself, but then again, in worst-case scenario, every little bit of adrenaline would help. After what seemed like an eternity, I spotted 2 weak light beams coming from the forest. I heard Paul shout my name. I've never been so relieved. I finally ran out of my hiding to greet my 2 friends. For quite some time we were just standing there, laughing like maniacs from relief. We were even getting a bit cocky, and we thought about staying. After all, there was just one, supposedly, creep lurking between the trees, and there were 3 of us. Funny, just minutes earlier I was crapping myself with fear, and now I was suddenly full of tough macho bull thinking what could possibly happen. In the end, healthy judgment got the better of us, and we decided to leave. We packed our things, put out the fire, and got out. We took our bottles of wine to enjoy somewhere else. Somewhere where it's nice and brightly lit. 2. For the sake of the story, I don't recall every word of my conversation. It was 15 years ago, so I will do my best to recreate them to make the story flow based on what I do remember. I was about 19 when I was offered a job by my cousin to work for our uncle's glass business. They install giant glass windows in tall buildings and skyscrapers. Not that it's too relevant to the story. The catch of the job was I had to temporarily move to Destin, Florida from Tampa. My cousin lives up in Russellville, Alabama, and I wanted to go visit the family there and leave with them together to go back down to Destin. This was my first long road trip, and my first trip away from my immediate family. Back when I was driving a puke green Mercury Sable, a car barely capable of getting groceries back home. But in my invincible youth, I didn't care about that. I was just so pumped to be spreading my wings and getting out into the world that the risks didn't concern me. My mom and dad tried to get me to plan and pack better, knowing the trip could have its pitfalls. But it wasn't like the trip was going to take a few days, and fast food exists, so I wasn't stressing out about that. I mean, I'm not stupid. I packed for the trip and staying for a few months in Destin. But they wanted me to bring food, water, emergency supplies, etc. I declined because it wasn't the 1930s, and of course there are gas stations at every exit, and I had a Razor flip phone. My thinking was what could possibly happen on 2 busy interstates. It wasn't like I was going to some far-off country with no cell service. Anyway, fast forward to the trip. I'm a Florida boy. I had no idea Alabama could get so cold, and I had no idea the heat was broken in my car. I had never used it. At first, I'm thankful, because by the time I reach Alabama, I'm tired as hell, and I had to make a lot more stops than I anticipated. I still had a few hours to go, and the cold air was keeping me awake. Finally, I pull off the interstate and start heading through these smaller numbered roads. The roads didn't have conventional names like in Florida. They were just numbered, which I found odd. After driving on those a bit, I started being sent down gravel roads. This was the days of MapQuest, so I didn't have a GPS guiding me through, just paved roads or rerouting me around roadblocks. I was starting to get hungry, and thought back to my parents telling me to pack food. I should have listened. The sketchiest thing with MapQuest was that you just printed out the directions. You didn't have a map to fall back on. So, going out of your way to find fast food at an exit came with the potential of legitimately getting lost. So I had passed a few signs telling me to turn off for food because I was tired and didn't want to chance it. Instead, I was looking off for something off the side of the road that I could easily pull in and back out with no fuss. And more importantly, no risk of getting lost. My prayers were answered a little down the road when I saw a beat-up old country grocery store on my right-hand side. It didn't even have a name, it just said "Grocery" across the front of the white building. I pulled in because the light shining across the grocery sign was on, but found it odd that most of the inside lights were off. This gave me the creeps a little, but didn't stop me from going up to the door. I was starving, and maybe this was a 24-hour place. I saw a shadow move across the back of the long aisles as I approached the glass door, and surprisingly opened it with ease. At this point, I half expected them to be closed due to the lack of lighting inside, and hoped an owner would take pity on a tired traveler and let me grab some snacks. I called out, "Hello?" No one answered. "I saw you when I pulled up and was hoping you're still open." Again, no answer. Now, this was really naive of me, but I assumed maybe the owner was older and couldn't hear me. There was a constant buzzing sound coming from the back. Or maybe he was deaf. So I went further back into the store. It honestly didn't smell great inside, and I hoped they at least had some chips or something. At least those are sealed. Suddenly a man emerged from the back. "I'm so sorry, we were just about to close. How can I help you?" he asked with a smile. He nearly made me jump out of my skin at first, but he seemed friendly enough. Not the old man I was picturing, but actually a younger guy, maybe in his 30s. "Yeah, I just come up from Florida. It's been a long drive. I was hoping you guys had something to eat for the trip." "We have plenty. What are you looking for exactly?" he said, without taking his eyes off of me. The guy had a weird, unblinking stare that put me on edge. But what made me the most uncomfortable was his smile. He smiled big, but his eyes never moved. As in, the only way you could tell he was conveying an emotion was by looking at his mouth. The rest of his face stayed the same. Most people, you could tell they're smiling even if their mouth was covered, because you smile with your whole face, not this guy. "Just some chips, maybe a Coke. Do you have Doritos?" "Of course," he said, walking past me. He locked the door behind me, before turning and smiling. "Don't want anyone else walking in." Him locking the door was creepy, but I shrugged it off because the reasoning was sound, even though it felt off. "Follow me," the guy said as he walked towards the back of the store. I was young, but I should have been smart enough to know that the store owners don't generally give their customers a tour of the store. But I'd lived a pretty sheltered life. I could feel that something was off, but didn't want to offend by asking questions like, "What's that smell?" We get to the back of the store, to where those plastic flaps hang that separate the customer side and the back end, and the man sticks his hand through parting the plastic and says, "Right this way." Now alarm bells are going off in my head, especially as he starts looking around and past me, like someone who is selling drugs and watching out for the police. "Back there?" I ask, and start to back up a little. That's when I notice chips beside me on the aisle. The guy noticed me see the chips and says, "Yeah, back there. We got our good stuff in the back. You can come take your pick." By this time I find the source of the buzzing. Flies are buzzing over the meat section, and the dim light reflecting off of the packaging lets me know that it's been sitting there a while. "I'll just take this if that's all right," I say nervously as I grab the bag off the shelf next to me and start backing up towards the door. "Trust me, those are no good. I have way better stuff back here," he smiles, gesturing for me to head back. I fake pat my pockets and say, "Oh man, I forgot my wallet in my car, I'll be right back." As soon as the words left my lips, I spun around and did a light jog to the front, increasing with speed as I approached the door. I make it to the door and twist the lock a couple times until I hear the click. I push the door open and turn back to look where the man is, but he's gone. I jumped in my car and sped out of the parking lot and didn't stop again until I reached my cousin's house. 3. I moved to a mid to small Midwest American town with my boyfriend and 2 doggies last June for my doctoral internship year. It was an adjustment after living in a southern beach town as well as a major city before that. Our living space is one of the factors that has made the move a positive experience. We were on one side of a twinplex 2-story home with a dividing wall that sits on 2 acres with some treed areas around it. Our landlord is a retired man in his 60s, kind and gets stuff done quick. There's a badass single mom and her kids, and a huge Akita and a firearm on the other side of the twinplex. The kids are ages 17, 13, and 8 years. The family is wonderful. This story isn't about them. It's about the man next door. I got a weird vibe from him the first time I met him, not a knee-jerk reaction or anything, just a sort of question mark hovering above his head. Like drawing a blank. In lieu of overt negative interactions, my boyfriend and I have been your typical level of neighborhood friendly. We give the wave here and there, and have no active grudge against him, although my boyfriend doesn't have the same instinct about the man, he trusts mine. It's nothing I can point to, which, as we all know, means nothing. Gift of fear, y'all, our L&M Bible. I'm thrown off by this man. It doesn't keep me up at night, and it's not something I ruminate on, but it's idling in the back of my mind every time I take the dogs in our large backyard in view of his home. I've been thinking back to the very few interactions I've had with this man, which I can count on one hand. The first interaction we ever had was due to a dogfight. In fall 2019, a big male dog with no collar showed up on our property and approached my big dog. The dog wasn't displaying threatening posture, he was only curious. Unfortunately, my usually mushy-gush, snuggle-bean boxer mix got attacked badly a few years ago by another dog, and he's got a little doggy trauma now. Anytime he sees a male dog his size or larger, or appears larger due to floofs, he gets hyper-vigilant. He misinterprets any wrong move as ready to attack, and attacks first. Think along the lines of ready at any moment PTSD response in a soldier, on the fight side of the fight, flight, freeze, appease reaction. So Big Dog didn't take kindly to this unidentified dog fella. He responded like you'd expect and went after him. I saw two men standing about 50 yards away, near the house in the yard next door. I assumed the uncollared dog belonged to one of them, and called out for them to help break it up and retrieve their dog. The two men ran over and broke it up. Meanwhile, I'm standing there, hitting the dogs with my dog's leash, trying to stop them. Vicious snarls and all, which I am 100% sure was as dumb-looking as it was ineffective. The other dog ran off. For your peace of mind, by the way, that little sweetie is just fine. He escaped unscathed, aside from puncture wounds on his neck that required no veterinary action. So there I was, sobbing, thanking both of the men for breaking it up. It turned out it wasn't their dog after all. The neighbor said he'd seen the dog around before, and believes he tends to get out and thinks he knows where the dog lives. They were kind and reassured me my dog was in the right, in protective mode, and the other dog running up in the property was easily interpreted as a threat to him. The conversation was without incident. I thanked them and brought Big Dog back inside. Another interaction we had was a few months later, when the neighbor was in his yard, an appropriate distance away, and I was taking Big Dog out and Small Dog. Small Dog is a perma puppy-sized beagle. Trouble with a capital T, but disgustingly sweet and cute. Big Dog is well trained and can be off-leash in appropriate areas, no problem. My neighbor said hello, and made conversation about how he's never sure if he's able to pet my dog, because he always barks at him from our window. I assured him Big Dog is extremely friendly, not to worry. I also made an irritating mental note that neighbor inquired about Big Dog's threat level, and told him he's zero threat at all. I don't know about y'all, but my automatic reaction is to calm situations, make others comfortable, etc. And I've got a very high tolerance for odd behaviors. Overlooking odd behaviors is detrimental in these kinds of situations. I think it was a normal conversation to ask if your neighbor's dog is friendly, right? A learning moment for next time, I guess. Aside from this, there was one time when we briefly spoke about how deer come through our backyards. And he puts out food for them and the other critters in a few feeders. I see him in his backyard sometimes doing what I assume is normal yard stuff and critter feeding. I don't remember any other instances directly. This brings us to today, all morning and afternoon. I've been working on a scrapbooking project for my friend's 30th birthday, which is 7 months late. Thank you for the free time, COVID. The dogs are chilling by our sliding door that overlooks the back deck and large backyard and trees. My hot glue and I are minding our own damn business when all of a sudden, Big Dog started growling and Small Dog started barking. Regular barks are usually squirrel and chipmunk alerts, but growls are for threats. I looked up and followed their gaze. There in the trees on the border of our backyards was my neighbor. He was barefoot and dressed in khaki shorts and a black t-shirt. He was fussing around near the ground in the middle of the tree-line area that separates our expanses of unfenced yards. I figured he was refilling one of the feeders for the animals or something, but I kept watching because of the back-of-my-head question mark in this guy. Then he moved. He was already flirting with the property line where he was initially standing. He walked further, several paces into our property. In fuller view of our back deck and sliding door, I watched silently. Because I'm an anxious gal, I do double-check my alert reactions. For anyone who hasn't experienced anxiety, it's like having a jumpier needle than your average bear, to make sure I'm keeping my thought process relatively rational. I watched like this for a few seconds until he stopped moving. He halted on a patch of land a few paces beyond the property line, obscured by pine tree branches. All I could see was hips down, his knees were pointed at my window. While our yards are unfenced, there's an unspoken boundary neighbors don't cross here. It's a sloppy-looking star shape, there is a house at each point, and the expansive backyards all meld, converging into the center lawn. He had no business being near our area of the yard. There is nothing else to look at. It's our twinplex, and it's our side of the home. Which begs the questions. Exactly what the fuck are you doing, sir? Get your knees out of my trees. The best excuse I can come up with is that he was wistfully surveying his home and yard with the pride of a man who mows it himself, but that's a long shot. Doing anything resembling looking at his own home or yard would have required him to rotate his body more than 70 degrees to his left. I stood up, in the middle of the room, and approached the window so he could see me looking out directly at him, keeping him in my peripheral. I glanced around briefly to find my phone so I could take his picture, which I am happy for him to see me doing in broad daylight. I couldn't find it though, so I just watched. My body was stable, but I noticed my bones started shaking a little. I think I was having that behind-the-scenes brain acknowledgement that there was no other explanation for him to have been postured like that, faced toward me. After about 30 seconds, he casually walked back over to his side of the property, and made what looked to me like a half-assed attempt to look like he was just picking a few things off the ground, like you do to clear a few pieces of litter. He paused in his yard, still obscured by the trees from the hips down. He was stationary. I walked to our bedroom to get a closer view out of our partially drawn blinds. In the 5 seconds it took to walk from the main room to our bedroom, he disappeared. I immediately called my boyfriend at work to let him know what's up. Even he agreed it was weird, and he's the polar opposite of dramatic. Very understated. I walked out on my back deck in what could have been full view if he had still been outside, and knocked on my neighbor's sliding glass door overlooking the deck. I told her what I noticed, and we agreed it was weird. She asked if big or small reacted negatively to the neighbor, and I said no. She agreed it was weird, and we're on the lookout now. We both went outside and blatantly stood where he was standing to get a look at the view. It was a clear shot to our window. I noticed it was dark inside my home, so even though I was standing in plain sight and staring at him, he likely wouldn't have seen it. I texted my landlord next, and he doesn't know the man at all. My landlord's mother-in-law lived in this space before us, and she hadn't mentioned anything. He was quick and responsive and encouraged me to call our sheriff's office. I touched base with my boyfriend again, too. I asked him about Big Dog's reaction to the neighbor, just to be sure, and that's when I found out I was wrong. Apparently my boyfriend noticed Big Dog growls at this neighbor, hair up, every time he sees him. No one else, only him. As far as I'm concerned, 3 strikes you're out, baby. My weird feeling, my dog repeatedly growling, and knees in my trees. I have my eyeballs trained straight on you, motherfucker. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 502. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I would like to give a shout out to Reddit user derp herp derp d derp. the author of story number 2, the one in the creepy grocery store with the person who was clearly a serial killer. Thank you very much for allowing me to use your story. Okay, this goes up Monday, so if all goes according to plan for me, by the time you guys are listening to this, I should be about halfway through, hopefully more, production on the rest of the week's videos. When they're done, I'll get to work on the following weeks, then I'm going to do a week of toe wiggling. Would like to say thanks to the chat for keeping me company while recording. They're currently talking about something depressing, but still, thanks for keeping me company. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.